Hey, everybody, welcome back to the very first episode since Kilimanjaro. I've been talking about that with you on the show for months, and I summited with my team Mount Kilimanjaro on September 11th, 2025. But the truth is, it wasn't the story I thought it would be. More on that later. Because as I think about it, my entire story isn't a story that I thought it would be. If I think back to my earliest years, I was a kid that was flush with fear. Everything I was afraid of: roller coasters, climbing trees, popping wheelies, talking to girls. Fear gripped me in every part of my life. Now that over the years, it started to change, but this has been a 30-year, I'm 51 actually, so 51-year journey. And things, for those of you who know my story, things started to change even more so around 2006 when I was diagnosed with adrenomyeloneuropathy. AMN, it affects men typically between their 20s and their 50s. And I was diagnosed when I was 32. And over time, because of the degenerative nature of AMN, my walking became more labored, and I started to end up being on the sidelines again, like that kid in 1985. And fears just came back to me. What would my life be? Was my life going to get smaller again? Was I going to be on the sidelines? And then in 2017, I moved into life in a wheelchair full time. But I knew that fear wasn't the problem. I had learned that over my life. I knew the problem was staying stuck because of fear. And I knew in that time period, I didn't want to stay stuck. And so I started asking questions. What could I do? So I eventually participated in a triathlon on the swim leg. And then I started doing Spartan races. And again, some of you know my story well, but these Spartan races ignited something in me and a desire to continually push limits. And then decided in August of 2023 to climb a mountain. And that mountain that presented itself was Mount Kilimanjaro. And we did it. We did it. We pushed limits. But as I said, the story wasn't what I thought it would be. Leading up to the climb, I convened this amazing team of 33 people. That alone was part of my impossible. And as we were leading up to the climb, we set in place a leadership team and we defined 3 shifts of people within that larger team that were gonna rotate on and off the chair, 30 to 45 minutes per shift to keep everyone fresh and strong. The group that we hired to lead us, Winrika Adventures, they brought their wisdom and their experience, over 100 porters and guides to support us, just a monumental effort. And what I wanted to do today is just tell you a little bit about what it was all about and what I learned. And I want to preface what I'm about to say that everything I share here is my experience. There were 33 other people on our team, and then all those porters and guides, everybody had their own experience. And their experience may not be exactly reflective of what I'm about to share. And that doesn't make them wrong. That just makes their experience different than mine. So, going into Kilimanjaro, here's the game plan for what we were about to do. So, the climb is 6 days, 4 days up and 2 days down. And the Swahili word that was going to be our hallmark of our time is pole pole, slowly, slowly. So we went up slowly, very slowly over those 4 days to acclimate as we climbed. And we probably in the end ended up going even slower than that because of the wheelchair. So this climb, there are 4 distinct climate zones. The rainforest zone, it's lush and green and humid, a little muddy at points, and the temperature was probably 75, 80 degrees as we went up higher. It obviously cooled down and we moved into the moorland zone. These are extremely rocky slopes. When I say extremely, relentlessly rocky slopes. And we're going from about 9,000 feet to 13,000 feet in this zone. We're starting to move to the top of the tree line, and the temperatures are getting between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, at night, even cooler. Then we move into the alpine desert zone. This is the saddle region right as we're approaching the summit peak of Kilimanjaro, or approaching our base camp, which sits at the foot of the summit peaks. And it's getting colder and colder, between 40 and 60 degrees. Cold at night, could get down to 20 degrees. And then the last zone is the Arctic Summit Zone. We're going from about 16,000 to 19,300 feet. There's volcanic ash, a little bit of snow on the ground, given that we were there in the dry season, and the temperatures were anywhere between 0 and 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And the challenge here is that we had to pack for all of those temperatures. And the limits by the National Park Service was that our pack could only be 25 pounds. Now, I was in a unique situation, being that I am an adaptive person. I was given the ability to bring more of more items and more weight, um, to handle my self-care and some other factors that were unique to me. And so I was able to, bring on a second pack with all of those items. But for every other climber, the weight limit was 25 pounds per duffel bag, per person. And so we started on day 1. We go from Marengo Gate. Again, I'm just giving you the game plan. I'll dive into more details of what happened each day here in a minute. We go from Marengo Gate to on day 1 to Mandara Hut, gaining about 3,000 feet of elevation. The plan was that we would climb for about 6 hours. And then moving into day 2, we go from Mandara Hut to Harumbo Hut, gaining about 4,000 feet of elevation. This was going to be a very long day, about 12 hours. Very rocky, slow terrain, and this was a long push to our next stop, which was Harumbo Hut. And on day 3, we went from Harumbo Hut at around 12,400 feet to Kibo Hut, which was at around 15,400 feet. This was the shortest of our days, at least on our ascent. It was 6 miles. We went about a mile per hour. Um, m- and this was, as I mentioned, exposed saddle into the alpine desert, finally to reach our summit day base camp, called Kibo Hut. So then on day 4 was our summit day. The plan was we were going to start pre-dawn, and we did that. I'll share more about that here in a few minutes. And the expectation of the terrain, was that we could manage it, but the reality of the terrain was something very different. It was steep, it was thick volcanic ash, switchbacks, and there were ultimately 3 summit points on the crater rim of Kilimanjaro that were in our sight. So Gilman's Point is summit point 1, Stella Point is summit point number 2, and then Aruhu Peak is the ultimate summit point, and that's at 19,340 feet. Day 5, after the summit, The plan was to go from Kibo Hut all the way down to stop for lunch at Harumbo Hut and to go all the way down to Mandera Hut. That was a very, very long day. That also was almost a 12-hour day. And then day 6 was our shortest day, only about 4.5 hour descent to get us from Mandera Hut to back to to Marangu Gate. So that was the game plan, and I already gave you a little bit of insight of what we experienced all along the way. So let's dig in a little bit more about what we experienced, what I experienced, as I said before, and some of the things I learned along the way. So day 1, as I mentioned, we go through Marangu Gate and we step into the rainforest. It's lush, it's alive. We saw monkeys in the trees, but it was not an easy, gentle climb. It was a little bit muddy. Roots that had formed over centuries into almost staircases, lots of rocks to navigate, and every push of the wheelchair was a challenge. We started at the gate around 12:30 p.m. and what was interesting and in retrospect is our plan went to plan. So I mentioned before we had 3 teams that were gonna rotate on and off. That plan went as we had expected. My team, the My Impossible team, was on the chair, 33 people rotating on and off, to help me to navigate the rainforest. We were feeling pretty good. Mandera we got to Mandera Hut, after about a 6-hour climb, and, we're feeling good. And then day 2, there's a expression that or saying that, Mike Tyson used to say, probably still says it to this day, that everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, on day 2, we got punched in the mouth, and let me tell you just a little bit about that. So day 2 is in what's called the moorlands. In the moorlands, they are beautiful, but they're brutal. So the trail is so rocky, I feel every jolt of those rocks to the point that when we went through the section again on day 5, I physically got motion sick. And it really tested us. Our team, the My Possible team, started on the chair at the beginning. We started at around 8:30 a.m. and but we were feeling good. We're feeling good, but and making very slow progress. Around midday is when literally the wheels fell off and we felt the first punch in the mouth to our plans. So we were in a very rocky area of the moorland stretch, and we hit a rock with the right front caster, and the bolt sheared and broke. The wheel fell off. Now we had prepared for this moment, and we had a spare, and we repaired it quickly. We celebrated. I called the team together. We celebrated, and then 50 yards later, about 50 yards later, the left wheel hit a rock, and that bolt on the front caster, it broke. Now we had one more spare, so we fixed it in almost record time, but we had no spare bolts left. By the afternoon, the team realized our pace was way too slow. We needed to pick up speed, and so in this moment, we made a decision to have our Tanzanian porter team to take over on the chair and to push forward more quickly through this area with the My Possible team alongside. And this ended up being a demanding day that really tested us. It tested our energy, it tested our spirits. And after 12 hours, we got to Harumbo. The last 3 hours, we were in darkness, and we had headlamps that were lighting the way. Again, it just emphasizes this idea that everybody's got a plan, until you get punched in the mouth. And boy, did we ever get punched in the mouth. The reality of this moment and of how challenging this was going to be really started to set in. Well, we got there to Harumbo and got a good night's sleep, or as best of sleep as we could. We'll share in a future episode some of the challenges and some of the realities of camp life. We slept, we woke up in the morning in Harumbo camp, and we left Harumbo at 8 a.m. And this was really the last vegetation that we were going to see for a couple days. The vegetation disappeared around us. We were getting above the tree line. The trail to our summit base camp, it was long, exposed, open, unforgiving. And this path stretches across what feels like an endless saddle. The temperatures are dropping, the wind is picking up. At any given moment, there's no shelter. And the ironic part is for me in the wheelchair, this was actually the smoothest part of the climb. There were certainly rocks, but I was actually able to use my push rims on the chair to help the team through some of the stretch. But it was desolate. One of my team members actually said, "It feels like we're on Mars." Felt like we had left planet Earth and stepped onto another planet. But as we moved through this, we could see the summit peak, and what we were gonna take on, and it was beautiful, it was majestic, and that called us forward. This day, took about almost 7 hours, and we gained about 3,000 feet of elevation getting into, Kibo Hut, which was our summit base camp. I had a lot of time during this stretch to think, especially this moment where I was sitting just reflecting as we were taking a break on the climb, and I was looking at the summit peak of Kilimanjaro, what we were going to climb on day 4, and it was that alone was massive. And I felt small, in a good way. It put into perspective that this climb was not about me. It's about something so much bigger. And when I thought about my team, it's about so much more than my little self and my aspirations. This was about something bigger. This is about a community that was coming together and that we were dealing almost on a moment by moment basis with needing to adapt and to adjust. So we were at Kibo Hut. Um, we actually had time to settle in at camp, to have dinner, some great conversations in our rooms. I should have said that at the beginning. So we were not tent camping. We stayed in the huts, that A-frame style huts that were at each of the camps. So we were at Kibo, went to bed early, had a wake up call, so to speak, a knock on the door in our room at 3 a.m. Got up, prepared, dressed. The temperature, I don't remember or know what the exact temperature is, but it was frigid. Um, had breakfast, and then we departed from Kibo Hut at around 4:30 a.m. It was dark, it was cold, and the team was excited. I remember the energy. We were on the team was on the chair, and we started out of the camp, out of Kibo, onto a dusty, gravelly road that we were able to manage as a team. But the reality started to set in. We saw the sun rise behind us, and then we hit the rocks. The sun rose at around 6:20 a.m., and soon thereafter, we hit these steep switchbacks, these zigzags up the mountain, because going in a straight line was just not realistic. It was too steep, and so we had these switchback trails very rocky, very thick. This was about a 2-mile stretch, and by this point, the porters had to, again, completely take over movement of the chair. The previous 3 days had been so taxing for the team, and it was all that the individual team members could do to take on this climb themselves. And so our team naturally started to split. We didn't have a clear plan of how that was gonna work. So climbers went ahead, some small groups stayed together. A group of 7 individuals from the team stayed with me along with the porters, and we started to make our way through these switchbacks, and then the wheel fell off again. So we hit again on the right caster, a rock, and that bolt sheared and the caster flew off. So we had one remaining caster. We had no spare bolts. And in this moment, we made a decision to remove that wheel because in this extremely rocky terrain, I was going to be on my back wheels almost the entire time anyway, being lifted and transitioning from section to section. So we just made the decision in that moment to remove the remaining caster wheel and go up the mountain on my rear wheels. Kinda if you can imagine a rickshaw in the streets of New York or somewhere in Asia, that kind of feeling or image you could have in your mind of how that was gonna work. And so we proceeded. Porters on the chair, small group of 7 from the My Impossible team remained with me. Relentless scree, relentless rocks. We entered this phase of extremely rocky. It actually wasn't that far distance-wise, but every rock was a challenge. And the chair was lifted over rocks, around rocks, giant rocks. And then there was this one moment where the porters had lifted me up and they needed a break and they stopped as I was literally on top of a rock, and I was roller coaster style in a 45-degree position, looking almost face down, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "You can't leave me like this." And one of the phrases that the Tanzanians use, they primarily use it with tourists like us, but they use the phrase from The Lion King, Hakuna Matata. And if you remember what that phrase means, it means no worries, or they use it to convey to someone to relax. And one of the porters said to me, Hakuna Matata in that moment. And I was angry. I was angry. And I said to him, I am the most Hakuna Matata son of a gun you have ever met. And my language was a little bit more choice than that. And they all busted out laughing. I started to laugh, but something triggered for me. I don't know what happened in that moment, but the spirit of Hakuna Matata to be relaxed, to be at ease, to not have worries, it seemed in that moment to kind of settle in. Somebody would ask me later after the climb, was I scared as they were lifting me over the rocks? And the truth is, I wasn't. I wasn't. So we continued on, and we tried everything over these rocks. There was even a moment when we wanted to try to figure out a shortcut or different ways to handle the rocks and the switchbacks, and I literally got out of the wheelchair and with my arms around 2 porters and 2 of them holding my legs, tried to navigate where we were going and how we were approaching it. And I looked at the situation and I asked one of the porters who spoke a lot very good English. I said, "Is there any way to make this faster?" Can And he looked at me. He was, as I said, he was one of the older porters, and he said, "Jeff, there are no shortcuts." And again, something just resonated in me as he said that. Just realizing that for most of my life, I've been a guy who's looked for a quicker way. And in this moment, the reality was there were no shortcuts. It was only pole pole on the path that was given to us. Remember, pole pole, Swahili phrase for slowly, slowly. Realizing this was really, really hard. The mountain refused to make it easy. And I think about now when I reflect on how hard it was, that that was actually why we chose to do this because it was hard. And this quote from John F. Kennedy from 1962, where he said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard." And that's why we chose to do this. What I've realized in my life is that when I do hard things, I come alive. I come alive. And so we chose to do this because it was hard, because there was no shortcuts. So after around 10 hours, we overcame these enormous rocks and we reached Gilman's Point. It was around 3:30 p.m. And when we got to Gilman's Point, we had celebrated, we were joyful, we were hugging. We were also a little sad that we were celebrating with just a few of us, that so little of the team had done this together. Many of the team members we were starting to pass, they had already summited, and were now descending on Kilimanjaro. But we had this moment and we decided we're going to keep going. Even though it's already moving into later in the afternoon, we decided to keep going. So we continued to Stella Point. It was a short and brutal stretch, massive rocks. All the porters that we had with our small group were on the chair, and we reached Stella Point around 5 p.m. and you could already see the sun going down. We came upon from our team one of our most experienced climbers, and he said, You should start to descend from here." And we decided to continue on, but his advice, his thoughts still were stirring in my mind. And in about 15 minutes after Stella Point, our next destination being the final summit of Uruhu Peak, one of my team members caught up with me and we just paused for a moment and questioned, should we continue? So I stopped, breathed, I prayed, and in that moment, I felt the clarity to begin our descent from there. What I've learned subsequently is we were only about 500 yards away from Uruhu Peak. One of my team members passionately pleaded for us to continue and to not stop. One of the guides came up to me and asked, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." It was never about that sign or the picture in front of it. This is about us. This is about this amazing experience and this amazing height that we never could have imagined achieving. We did it together. There's a phrase, the summit is optional. Getting down the mountain is mandatory. And I'm not sure what would have happened. We may have been totally safe to go from where we were to Uruhu Peak. But in that moment, I felt very clear that it wasn't about the picture, it wasn't about the sign, and we started our descent. A lot of mixed feelings. The day in its entirety was, for me, it was about 16, 17 hours. For some of the team members that were behind me, was 18 plus hours, a grueling day. We woke up the next morning and I knew there were a lot of mixed feelings by so many on the team. Some felt guilty that they didn't continue with me, that they went ahead and they summited. Some were upset that the group had divided and that groups went ahead and didn't stay with me. But regardless of whatever people were feeling. I wasn't going to tell them not to feel that. What I said to them over breakfast is, please feel proud of what you did and what we did. So we began our descent. Day 5 and 6 were a descent through the alpine forest, through the moorlands, that brutal, rocky terrain, and then ultimately into the rainforest. And on that moorland stretch with all of those rocks, the porters were had taken over on the chair again, and I was basically cargo moving over those rocks. And I had so many mixed feelings going through that process. So many mixed feelings as I was basically in isolation. My team was behind me, some had gone on ahead in front of me, because that summit day experience lived up to almost nothing that I had imagined it would be. If I'm honest, in those quiet moments, alone in that wheelchair, I was feeling sorry for myself and for the team, as if something had been stolen from us and that I wanted so much more. It would have been a better story had it unfolded as I had imagined. But then I remembered there was this moment early on into my AMN diagnosis where I would dream about running. Earlier in my life, I had been somewhat of a runner. I had done a triathlon, and I imagined myself running fast and free, legs pounding on the ground with nothing holding me back. But life had changed at that point. My legs had stopped responding to what my brain wanted them to do, and I found myself moving through life in a wheelchair. Still, I kept longing to run and to compete. I had been exploring what were treatment options. How could I have maybe some miraculous recovery? And I would think to myself, if only I could run again, then my story would be complete. If only I could run again, that would inspire people. And then one day, I remember that I was complaining out loud to one of my mentors, somebody who had been in my life and through so much of my journey. And I said to him, again, somewhat complaining, wouldn't it be a better story if I could stand on my own 2 feet, start running, and show people that nothing can stop us? To show people I had been healed or recovered, and that what once was impossible was now possible. And he smiled at me. He said, maybe, but here's the thing: millions of people can walk, many can run. If you ran again, people would admire it. They would be in awe of the transformation. Yes. But what they need to see is so much rarer. They need to see somebody who keeps moving when life refuses to make it easy. They need to see a goal reached in spite of circumstances, not in spite of the wheelchair, but with the wheelchair. And I realized as I was thinking about this experience 12, 13 years ago, that that's exactly what happened on Kilimanjaro. That was what exactly we had experienced up to that point. If everything had gone the way I imagined, my team as a whole pushing and pulling the wheelchair all the way, summiting together at Yaruhu Peak in this magical, perfect moment, I I I had thought that that would be a good story. But what actually happened, the broken casters, the team dividing up on summit day, reaching the summit at different times, that was a great story because it showed me, it showed the team, it showed the world not how life is perfect, but how things are possible when they aren't perfect. And so here we are, almost 3 weeks later, a lot of acknowledgement from people on social media, people who see me around town who know about the climb, and people say and have said, "I'm proud of you." And I've struggled with feeling pride at times. Why are you proud of me? And then I realized a phrase that this same mentor has said to me. The most important thing in life is not what you do, it's who you become. And I've really sat with, because of the mountain and because of the messiness, because of the imperfection of it all, who have I become? And what I've realized is who I've become is the kind of person who doesn't measure myself by what do I accomplish, but by how I approach my circumstances and keep going and refusing to quit even when it's not easy. I become the kind of person that can be carried and who carries others, sometimes with just my words, and knowing that both are acts of strength. I become the kind of person that who trusts that the story that I'm living is the perfect story, and it's better than any one that I could have imagined or written myself. I've become the kind of person who no longer longs for the easy version of the story, but embraces even more the hard one. And I've become the kind of person who chooses courage over comfort, who chooses community over isolation, and who chooses faith over fear. I've become the person, a kind of person who I'm proud of. And I think for the first time in my life, I'm able to say that with confidence and with a peace about me. So I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a reflection on our climb. There'll be more to come on the show and in other forums. I just thank you for taking the time to listen.